Welcome to another episode of the Silmarillion Sessions. Your co-host, Dr. Mikhail Thompson, and this is Mr. William Lassiter. And today is a very special day. We've got the Gondor mug to prove it. It is Saint Smeagol Day. Did I jump ahead too fast? Today is March 25th. That is the day of the destruction of the ring and the celebration of the Gondorian New Year. So Happy New Year, everybody. Happy Novruz, as they say in some parts of the world. Because it's not just in Gondor, but this is the day that does mark a new year for actually many peoples in different civilizations across history around the world. So there might be something to it. It might be a day of some significance. Not only a long time ago in a galaxy very near at hand, as we know that Middle-earth is, but also throughout the ages. And so naturally, as everybody looks towards the coming of Easter and definitively proving the pagan origins of it and all that hogwash, people would be prone to look at Tolkien and say, well, he's just picking that because it's Easter and it's all allegory anyway. To which Tolkien rolls over in his grave every time somebody says that, and he hops back into his time machine and does something drastic. But anyway, without getting too far afield, I think the very interesting things to talk about today will be both the destruction of the ring, the significance of the date, and the fate or destiny. Better yet, if only there were a word in English, I think doom. The doom of Smeagol. Is he just a villain, or is there hope? In the words of Hans Urs von Balthasar, dare we hope? Is there the possibility of redemption for Smeagol? Which is a different question than Gollum, but we'll frame it that way. I think easier one to tackle, or more interesting one to tackle. Is there a possibility of redemption for Smeagol? So, how did we get here? Well, got to go back a little ways and say, in the beginning there was Eru, the One, Iluvatar. And we'll fast forward a little bit to where we are now. And actually, we're going to flip to the back of the book because it's the best way to read a story is read the first page, flip to the back, look at the ending, bada bing, bada boom, you've just shot through Dostoevsky. Now, Silmarillion, we get to the end and we can see the creation of, we're going to get to the end to start at the very beginning of, at least, what concerns us today, and that's the creation of the ring. Mr. Lassiter, what have you got for us here? Sauron and the creation of the ring, where does that really set things off? Can you situate that a little bit without, reciting the whole Silmarillion? Because we're doing that one bit at a time over many, many episodes. But how does this so Sauron's creating the ring? Can you give all the good folks at home out there in Radioland a brief synopsis of why are there these rings of power? We can make a video series on that.
Okay, so it's great, and the way I know it is that Sauron was a subordinate of Melkor. When Melkor split from Iluvatar, Sauron also went down, and so he is a subservient to Melkor. He's a lesser demon. So all those people that think, he's the worst thing in Middle Earth that ever occurred, no, not really. Melkor is a lot worse. But Melkor's out of the picture by the time we get to this era, okay? And we're in the second age, as it's called, of Middle Earth. And Sauron, essentially, he comes in a beautiful form because he and Melkor could both shapeshift, if you will. They looked gorgeous, and they spoke gorgeously, and they were just really really attractive kind of guy. And so Sauron comes to the elves, and he basically says, hey, you guys want to learn how to make some rings? Because I'd like to learn how to make some rings. Let's do it together. And he brings his knowledge to the elves, and together they're crafting rings. And the elves craft 3 independently of Sauron. I mean, they're kind of working with him, but they use their own power to craft 3 rings.
Side project.
And Sauron is working with the elves to craft rings as well. And together they craft these experimental rings to try and get the craft down, so to speak. And craft the 7 for the dwarves, and they craft the 9 for the men. And then Sauron sneaks away. He's like, thanks, guys, and takes off and hides himself in a place called Orodruin, or Radruin, the big moltenous volcano thing there in Middle Earth. And it's there that he crafts this one ring. And his whole intent the entire time was to craft rings that he could use to snare other people. He does not craft the elvish rings, but he crafts the dwarvish and the human rings with the help of the elves. And then he goes and crafts this one ring himself. And it's there that the elves perceive, oh my gosh, this guy has betrayed us. He's created a ring that is not what we want. It's not designed for good. It's designed purely for evil. And so they make war on him. And there's this massive war where he gets defeated ultimately. And the ring passes out of the ken of everybody. It disappears. And that's the end of the second age. And we move into the third age where the ring, we don't know where it is. Have no idea at all. Okay. And so that's the third age. And that brings us up to the story of Bilbo. Okay. So that's essentially what I know about the ring. And I'm sure people are free to correct me on whatever I've botched.
So that's really interesting because that's one of the things that actually never occurred to me before is the really brief career in the public eye of the ring prior to really Bilbo stumbling upon it in the dark under the Misty Mountains. And even then, it's in the possession of an insignificant, inconsequential hobbit and some backwater for the next, 80 years or something until Frodo really runs off, saunters off towards Rivendell. As there's all this to do about. So really, Bilbo's not wrong at the end of Lord of the Rings when he says, all this to do, all this hubbub about that little ring of mine, what is all this about anyway? Whatever became of that thing? I lost it, Bilbo. Frodo kind of like, old man forgetting what the whole point of the last, 20 years has been. But he's not wrong, really, because when you look at the broad history, the long history, Sauron made this ring and he was going to cover the world in a second darkness, but it kind of anticlimactically, he gets his finger chopped off by Isildur, and that's it. That's the end of it. There's not a long, drawn-out, ages-long strife like with the Silmarillion, with the Silmarils. This is something relatively short-lived. It's an evil ring, to be sure, but Sauron only wields it for a time. And this is this great battle, the Battle of Pelennor. Yeah, there was a huge battle. Maybe it took place over, a few years or something. Gil-galad, the last alliance of men and elves, a thing of legend. But there's not as much written in the, let's say, there's not as much of the literature about that as there is about the whole backstory with the Silmarils and all that comes with that, the creation of the world, the Silmarils, Morgoth, and all of that. Yet this is a thing of great import, a thing of great power, and it does end up ruining the races of men, ruining the races of the dwarves, insofar as having a major and lasting traumatizing influence on these peoples, on these races, because of what become the Nazgul, because of whatever happens to the dwarves with their rings, which is all kind of like many things with the dwarves, kept in-house, a little bit secret. And we can allude to them, but nothing's really explicit. But there's this one ring, and then we know, anybody who knows, anybody who's not been living under a rock for the last close to 25 years now, since the Lord of the Rings first came out in film, everybody knows the basic plot line of the story. Right. I think at that point.
Right. Yeah, and that last, you mentioned the last alliance of elves and men. That's as I said, that's the end of the second age. It was this huge uprising against Sauron before he could actually put the ring into full practice. There's a big battle. Gil-galad sneaks in. He slices the ring off of or was it Isildur? I think maybe it was Isildur.
Yeah, Gil-galad slaying people with his spear left and right by the thousands, and then.
And if I'm not utterly mistaken, Gil-galad actually dies in. Because it dies in that battle, dies soon after. But one way or the other, Isildur is the one that chops off the ring from the hand of Sauron. He takes the ring for himself, and he's going to throw it into Mount Doom, into Radruin, to destroy it. But he chooses not to do so. This is significant because of the passage we're going to look at in a minute or two.
He's not the last person to do that.
Precisely. He stands at the cracks of doom, as they're called there on Radruin, and he says, I'm not going to do this thing. This is mine. It's my precious. And against the advice of the elves, and I think against the advice of Gil-galad, he takes the ring for himself. As he's riding back home, he gets assaulted by orcs, and although he is able to fight them off, they basically drive him into the river where he's trying to hide, and they shoot him full of arrows, and he dies, and the ring goes down to the bottom of the Anduin River, and that's where Smeagol gets it. And so there's a circuitous route by which it gets to Smeagol and into the earth, and then into Bilbo's hands. And so really, like we had mentioned earlier, something about Smeagol going into the rock being like a burial. The ring also gets buried in that instance. It goes into the tomb, and it's not completely dead, so to speak. It's still living and trying to get back to its master, because that's one of the qualities that it has. But it does go from Smeagol to Bilbo to get back out into the light, and so we go into this another insignificant character that then ends up being the sort of path towards its own destruction. You know. So yeah, and I'd like to, if you don't mind, I'd like to read that passage from Silmarillion where the construction ring comes, because a lot of this, the discussion about the ring that's fascinated me for, I don't know, upwards of 45 years, has been, well, what is it? What is it? What is he getting at? What is the thing that he's trying to drive at with this image of the ring? So let me share screen here, and we'll read the passage together from the Silmarillion. This is at the very end of the work, and I have no doubt that I'm going to violate copyright laws here. All right,
this is for educational purposes and fits within the blah blah blah. You can look up the regulations.
That's all. And if it does hurt, then I'll cut this part out and I'll put up a big, like, you know, thumbs up or banana. So this is from the very last part of the text of the Silmarillion. And he goes in, I think this chapter is actually called the Third Age and the Forming of the Rings, this part. So it's very end. Sorry. It says, men of Numenor have been exiled by this point, so that's a later thing. But those are the men who basically are exiled and no good. The exiles of Numenor established their realms in Arnor and in Gondor. But ere many years had passed, it became manifest that their enemy Sauron had also returned. He came in secret, as has been told, to his ancient kingdom of Mordor, beyond the Efelduath, the mountains of shadow. And that country marched with Gondor upon the east. There by the valley of Gorgoroth was built his fortress, vast and strong, Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower. And there was a fiery mountain in that land that the elves named Orodruin. Indeed, for that reason, Sauron had set there his dwelling long before, for he used the fire that welled there from the heart of the earth in his sorceries and in his forging. And in the midst of the land of Mordor, he had fashioned the ruling ring. There now he brooded in the dark until he had wrought him for himself a new shape, and it was terrible, for his fair semblance had departed forever when he was cast into the abyss at the drowning of Numenor. And he took up again the great ring and clothed himself in power and the malice of the eye of Sauron, few even of the great among elves and men could endure. So that may be the second passage that refers to his forging of the ring. I'm not entirely sure, but the point being is that it's in Orodruin that he does this thing, that he forges. So let me see if I can.
And that's, yeah, so it's in Orodruin, Mount Doom, as they call it in the common speech in the Lord of the Rings, and that's why it has to go back to those fires, because it's made essentially indestructible, that it can only be destroyed in the very fires wherein it was made in the first place. Nothing else has power, not even dragon fire, to destroy it.
Right. It is utterly indestructible, and it is very plain compared to the other, because all the other three rings, for instance, for the elves, they have these gems on them, and the other rings are wrought in such a way that they're quite beautiful and ornate. This ring is very simple, very basic.
Trinket.
And I think this is the passage where they actually talk about the forging of the ring. And I want to make sure I get the right thing. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so this is earlier in the text from that one that I just read. And it says, many found the easiest to sway of all the peoples of the earth, but long he sought to persuade the elves to his service, for he knew that the firstborn had the greater power. And he went far and wide among them, and his hue was still that of one both fair and wise. Only to Lindon he did not come, for Gil-galad and Elrond doubted him and his fair seeming. And though they knew not who in truth he was, they would not admit him to that land. But elsewhere the elves received him gladly, and few among them hearkened to the messengers from Lindon bidding them beware. For Sauron took to himself the name of Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, and they had at first much profit from his friendship. He said to them, Alas, for the weakness of the great, for mighty king is Gil-galad, and wise in all lore is Master Elrond, and yet they will not aid me in my labors. Can it be that they do not desire to see other lands become as blissful as their own? The wherefore should Middle-earth remain forever desolate and dark, whereas the elves can make it as fair as Eressëa, nay, even as Valinor. And since you have not returned thither as you might, I perceive that you love this Middle-earth, as do I. Is it not, then, our task to labor together for its enrichment and for the raising of all the elven kindreds that wander here untaught to the height of that power and knowledge which those have who are beyond the sea? And it says further, it was in Eregion that the counsels of Sauron were most gladly received, for in that land the Noldor desired ever to increase the skill and subtlety of their works. So it's the Noldor that he's really having influence on here in Middle-earth. And as we'll see as we go back in time, the Noldor are the ones who originally crafted those Silmarils, and that they were the ones that split and fled back to Middle-earth. And so they're the ones that he's kind of working on here to help him out.
Exactly. So these are the ones that have been connected previously to the whole War of the Silmarils and everything like that, whether they were with the Sons of Feanor or eventually against the Sons of Feanor. Everybody was eventually against the Sons of Feanor, but most of the Noldor were initially with them. Or in any case, the reason the Noldor are in Middle-earth in the first place, as we'll see in a future episode, is because of the kinslaying, and they opted. They rejected the mercy of the Valar to essentially repent of their deeds and came across to Middle-earth. So these are all sort of strangers and exiles who maybe have a bit of a dark history, skeletons in their closet anyway.
Yeah. What the Greeks called a hamartia. There's already a fatal flaw in this group of elves that leads them to at least listen to Sauron, if not do exactly what he says, listen to him and say, yeah, you may be right. And there's that earworm that he gives, maybe Gil-galad is not as concerned with things as you are, he doesn't give a darn about Middle-earth. Maybe, I don't know, maybe. So it's so interesting to me how the language, these sorts of speeches that Tolkien comes up with, you can hear them coming out of the mouths of politicians in the 20th century over and over. Oh, people are not so concerned about Italy as I am. I really want to form Italy and make it stronger. I want Italy to be great.
We could be ancient Rome again.
That's right. That's right. We could. We have a car deal and everything, So what was the Mussolini's car company? What was that? It was, somebody lost the name. He and his car company were like this. And I can't remember the in existence. And I can't remember any of it suddenly. But anyway, yeah, we'll be great. Go forward.
I mean, they had that Volkswagen thing in Germany. There was that.
Yes, that on the elevator guy. But it was some car company. It wasn't Citroen. It was something else. And it'll come to me. Anyway, the text goes on, and we're getting right up to the forging of the ring. So that's the point of all this, right? Moreover, they were not at peace in their hearts, since they had refused to return into the West, and they desired both to stay in Middle-earth, which indeed they loved, and yet to enjoy the bliss of those that had departed. So they're like of two minds here, and they want to go two different ways. Therefore, they hearkened to Sauron, and they learned of him many things, for his knowledge was great. In those days, the smiths of Ost and Edil surpassed all that they had contrived before, because they're learning so much from Sauron. And they took thought, and they made rings of power. By the way, those of you who follow Amazon, where did they get that title? Gee whiz. There it is, right there in black and white. If you can't see this, if we have to censor it, believe me, it's right there. They didn't really do it justice, but whatever. But Sauron guided their labors, and he was aware of all that they did, for his desire was to set a bond upon the elves and to bring them under his vigilance. So he's like, they're computer programming, right? And he's creating a backdoor computer program. Yep. And here's the salient paragraph, the most important paragraph. Now the elves made many rings, but secretly Sauron made one ring to rule all the others, and their power was bound up with it. to be subject wholly to it, and to last only so long as it too should last. And much of the strength and will of Sauron passed into that one ring. For the power of the elven rings was very great, and that which should govern them must be a thing of surpassing potency. And Sauron forged it in the mountain of fire in the land of shadow. And while he wore the one ring, he could perceive all the things that were done by means of the lesser rings. And he could see and govern the very thoughts of those that wore them.
Even the 3 that the elves made? I mean, that's what that is.
The next paragraph. See, that's why I got to keep reading in this stuff. But
okay.
Because it says the elves were not so lightly to be caught. See that, and that's the thing is that even these Noldor, they're like, yeah, you make a lot of sense. Yeah, I don't think that's gonna work, you know. And so this is they do have enough savvy to recognize that they're being bamboozled when they're learning this craft. So it says, right. As soon as Sauron set the one ring upon his finger, they were aware of him, and they knew him, and perceived that he would be master of them and of all that they wrought. Then in anger and fear, they took off their rings. We're talking the 7 and 9 here, just for the record. Okay, those are the rings that they take off. But he, finding that he was betrayed and that the elves were not deceived, was filled with wrath. And he came against them with open war, demanding that all the rings should be delivered to him. Right? You reneged on the deal, and it's in the contract. I want it back, you know. So he goes and makes war on them to get back these rings that he's created, these 16 rings, if my math is right. He came against them with open war. Right? Since the elven smiths could not have attained to their making without his lore and counsel, but the elves fled from him, and 3 of their rings they saved and bore them away and hid them. Now these were the 3 that had last been made. They possessed the greatest powers. Narya, Nenya, and Vilya, they were named. The rings of fire, and of water, and of air, set with ruby, and adamant, and sapphire. And of all the elven rings, Sauron most desired to possess them. For those who had them in their keeping could ward off the decays of time and postpone the weariness of the world. But Sauron could not discover them, for they were given into the hands of the wise, who concealed them and never again used them openly, while Sauron kept the ruling ring. And therefore the 3 remained unsullied, for they were forged by Celebrimbor alone. The hand of Sauron had never touched them. They were subject to the one. It's an interesting, almost ambiguous paragraph. On the one hand, these are the ones that were most powerful. These are the ones that were the elemental rings of fire and air and water. Right. These are the ones that were saved. These are the ones that were hidden. These are the ones that were created by Celebrimbor alone, and yet they were subject to the one. So
somehow their power draws from the same technique, the same technical source in some way.
Yeah.
Tap into the same manner.
And that's why Galadriel later says, when you destroy the ring, everything that we've created here in Lothlorien will be destroyed. It will be gone.
Right.
Because she's well aware of that the destruction of the ring means her own doom. And the temptation, therefore, greater to grab the ring from Frodo and to basically make herself the master of Middle-earth with that and the ring that she bears as well on her hand. But the point here being that, 3 rings are separate from the other 16, but the one ring is the ring that rules all of these forces in Middle-earth. It is a controlling ring of everything that exists, basically, in this construction of rings. And Sauron puts his own power into the ring, and there's a whole bunch of geekery online that talks about, is it 1/3 his power or 1/2 his power? I don't know. It's a large portion, whatever it is. And so when the ring is destroyed, it's going to mean his destruction. And there's an interesting thing that was brought up in a podcast, that the ring is frequently referred to by Isildur and by Sméagol and by Frodo as precious. Bilbo thing has become precious to me, you know. Precious is frequently allied with the ring. It turns out, from what I remember, the name Melkor means precious, one who is valued. So there's an attachment here, not just to Sauron with the ring, but also to his boss, Melkor himself, the power of Melkor. And whatever it was that Melkor did that was so sinister, that's also wound up with what this ring is. The ring is a concentrate. It's like concentrate of lemon, it's concentrated force of whatever that thing was that Melkor did.
Concentrated pure evil?
Yeah, or something. Yeah. If we're going to figure out what this ring is, and we're kind of edging towards meaning of the ring. That's how I've always done this in any trying to understand the ring. You can't come at it directly. You can't say, "Oh, it means sin,"
No.
or it means that doesn't work. You can't do that
because it's not an allegory, like the one thing over and over and over.
Yes,
applicability, yeah, right, but not allegory.
No, and so when trying to figure out what it is, you have to think about, well, what are its origins, what are its connections, what are its names, what are its powers, all this sort of stuff. That allows you to kind of edge closer to it. It's like trying to figure out what that metaphor in Plato of Gygas's ring, what is that supposed to mean?
Right.
Which I find that to be a little bit more obvious in a way than this image, I should say. But so the origins are important. Like, where did it come from? Why was it made? It was made to control everything. It was forged in Aradwan secretively, right? He's hiding in a corner. He's like a Gollum down there being like, I'm making a ring. And it had control over every other ring that enhanced the powers of the beings. Okay. So to make a long story short, he makes war on the other peoples of the earth. He seduces them by giving rings to them, 7 to the dwarves and 9 to the men, the Númenóreans. And basically he enslaves them to his power. Humans very, very quickly, and they become the wraiths, the Nazgul. Dwarves, not so much. They really resist him. And they eventually get devoured or tortured to death, and the rings come back to Sauron. And so he recaptures all but the 3 rings of the elves, and then the 1 ring that, of course, has been lost for all this time. So I'm going to stop share here for just a sec. That's essentially what the history leading up to the Bilbo story and the Frodo stories is. That's what we're dealing with here, is this ring business. And I think it puts us in a good spot to think about, well, what are the literary origins of the ring? What connections does it have that he might be getting at? So I'll kick off with one that I'm pretty sure he was referring to. There are 2 that I think he's referring to. One was, as I mentioned before, Gygas's ring from the Republic, book 2, I believe. And in that story, the ring is discovered in a cave in the body of a giant, and it gives the guy who recovers it, Gygas, Earthman, is what that word means, like geography, Gygas. He recovers that ring. Basically, he's able to become invisible, and he conquers everything, and he becomes the ruler and forces everybody else to his will. So there's that element. But there's also, in the story of, I think it's Vanamoinen, in the Finnish mythology, there's also a great ring that was wielded by the wizard, and that's another element that he was drawing from, was this tremendous ring story. And there's even the ring of the Nibelung, the ring cycle that Wagner later, that he makes later in his story. That ring enhances the creative power of the dwarf, whose name suddenly eludes me, but it allows him to make better and better and better treasure. Those are the 3 major ring images that we have. But rings also show up in literature all over the place. They are what are called a natural image versus a conventional image. Natural conventional symbol. Natural symbol is, by its very nature, it embodies what it seeks to convey. So like water, which is wet and deep and dark and scary and has things in it, but also is necessary for life, is a perfect symbol for baptism, because baptism is out entering into this mystery where there are things that you don't recognize, and it's necessary for life, but also can mean death, as in death to self. So water is a natural symbol, not because it's part of nature, birds and trees and stuff, but because by its nature, it embodies what it seeks to convey. Then there's conventional symbol. That's something as a society we agree upon. And to know that is to know certain elements that you wouldn't be able to access otherwise, is to know the culture that you're dealing with. So in this case, we're dealing with a natural symbol The ring is, well, in this case, it's gold. It's circular. It's plain, and those are all natural symbols that represent something. This image is itself unadorned. It is one of the first primary mathematical symbols. It binds somebody together. I mean, why do we wear rings when we get married? It's binding, right? That natural symbol is itself something which allows us to see the world or work with the world in a certain way. The gold represents purity, if you will, pureness of thought. It also represents fire and has connections to fire. It is parallel to other circular images like we have, like the sun, for instance, or the moon.
Exactly.
And so it's a symbol which by its nature is conveying a great deal. He doesn't have not like the Lord of the Socks, or the Lord of the Pencil.
Yeah. It's a there's a symbolism to the ring as ring, and there's both conventional and natural elements to it. And I think the strongest thing is that circular element, because as a circle, it's a geometric shape. It's the simplest shape. It's one without corners. You got that strength, unity, infinity, because it doesn't begin or end, and so on and so forth. But also a hollowness to the middle of it, or a fullness, depending on how it's applied and interpreted. But a ring can convey both, right? A symbol can have opposite meanings and significations depending on the applied context for that particular symbol.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned infinity. The Ouroboros is the image that comes to mind immediately, the dragon devouring its tail.
Right.
But you also mentioned this idea of emptiness inside the ring. Yeah, it could be emptiness or fullness. That's true. And in Jewish mythology, it's both, because creation of the world happens based on something that the divine light, the infinite light, the Ein Sof, decides to do. Hashem decides to scoop out of his infinity an empty space called his, right? That's where he makes this empty space, and into that he puts just a little drop of his essence or being, and that's the start of creation. That's the let there be light. All right, let there be light, and there was light. Okay, and from that, all creation spirals out from, but it's spiraling out into the empty space so that it can go somewhere. Because if there's already something there, it can't go anywhere, right? So he has to make way. Hashem has to make way for the thing to occur by scooping away himself, like scooping away a pit in order to make the building or whatever it is. But the way that the Jews always represented it was through mathematical imagery. And so they said that the scooping out was a circle. And then into that circle, there was this pinpoint, boing, and then that pinpoint would divide and divide and divide in a perfect golden proportion, that it would generate new life according to the pattern of what later is called the Fibonacci sequence. Right. In basically a spiral to fill up the empty space that Hashem had created. Very big empty space, just for the record. But it was all based upon the emptiness of that circle. And so they represented this in their ancient temples, where they would have, the temple had two divisions to it. In the Sanctum Sanctorum, you had the, all of it was itself encased in a larger rectangle shape that then was surrounded by a rectangle wall, and the wall of the rectangle was in proportion to the wall of the temple by the golden proportion. And then the golden wall, the temple to the Sanctum Sanctorum, was also the same. And then inside there, you had the division was into two squares, and inside each square was circumscribed this circle. In the one, you had the Ark of the Covenant, but in the other, you had nothing. It was totally empty, because it represents that empty space that Hashem had created originally. So, long story short, and sorry to wax eloquent, but I think Tolkien is playing with the same idea of nothingness or emptiness in the ring at the same creation. Ring is both. It can't be used for any good, but there are good things that come from the rings that were developed by the elves in the same time that this ring was created. Yeah.
Exactly right. It's rings as such. And now talking about this particular ring seems to lean into the emptiness element, or rather, some rings, because they're empty, can make full. Say, like in other words, to make whole. So the three rings of the elves, they're rings, and they have all that ring symbolism. And by being empty, they can make whole, right? So ring is by nature empty until you put your finger in it, right? Then you're wearing it. And now they make whole because they make things whole. They can preserve, they can give life, wisdom, evidently make ships to break free of the orbit, regular material orbit of materiality, and get to Elvenhome even after the seas are bent, and so on. This ring, the One Ring, and evidently from that, the 9 rings given to the Lords of Men and the 7 rings given to the Lords of the Dwarves, because they've then been corrupted, positively corrupted by Sauron with his One Ring. They now make hollow by being filled with this particular power, or in this case of the One Ring, it's been filled with Sauron's essence, his strength, his will, his might, now makes hollow the bearer. And so we see, that's where we see, say, Smeagol is stretched out and made, he's hollowed out, and gets this unnaturally it's not long life in the sense that he just keeps living, but it's like he all of a sudden becomes putty, like a super stretched Armstrong gone from here to the neighbor's place, and you just get really elongated and stretched out. And Bilbo feels this, and the beautiful image, like just moving image of being butter spread out over too much bread. Notice, normally we would say not enough butter over a slice of bread, like too thin, like the butter, like there's something wrong with the butter. He's saying no, butter, like a perfect amount of butter, normal butter, that is his essence, his life, his lifespan, spread out over too much bread. Now it has to, it's somehow hollowed out or stretched over more space than is natural for the regular amount allotted to a person. And we see a similar thing starting to happen with Frodo, obviously. Now, Frodo, we see undergo some changes of a similar sort precisely because of being stabbed by the Nazgul knife. He becomes wraithish. His left hand, was it left side, his left eye, never really becomes fully opaque again. It's always a little bit translucent, a little bit fade. You kind of see through it. But yeah, so it hollows out. And now I want to give a moment here. So the people who have worn it, Sauron has worn the ring. Isildur has worn the ring. For a very short time, he has it, and then he's killed. He makes it home, incidentally, to Gondor, enough to write an account of it. It's been some days, but I don't even think he makes it more than a couple of weeks, if that, before he's riding north and gets slain in the river. Then Daegul has the ring for a brief moment, never puts it on, but holds it. And then Smeagol, of course, murders Daegul, gets the ring, wears it for many long centuries, and I think close to 500 years. Well, not quite 500, but it's 400 something years, and then he sort of forgets about it. And I think that's a very interesting turn, and that's overlooked and I would say, to Smeagol's credit, there's this point where he begins to forget about the ring and not wear it so much. That's how it's in the passageway under the Misty Mountains in the first place when Bilbo stumbles upon it. He has it, Frodo wears it, Sam wears it for a short bit, and then it goes back to Frodo, and so on. Then into the fire, thanks to our hero, Smeagol. But it hollows out, right? It has this power, but it hollows you out. No, if we look at the One Ring, I want to compare that now to the 9 rings given to men and the 7 rings given to the dwarves. Now, men and dwarves are corrupted according to their own nature. And we don't, again, so much about the dwarves is just plain secret to us. Tolkien leaves it that way. They're a closed people because they're not based on Jews. Yes, the place we talked about before, the place of dwarves in Middle-earth society, particularly in The Hobbit more than otherwise, is likened to the place of the Ashkenaz Jew, which is not all Jews, right? It's Some very dear friends of mine are Sephardim, and they are not Ashkenazi. It's not the same thing.
No.
Now, to say nothing of the Tolkien, right, which is why in Italy you don't refer to them as Jews, you call them Hebrews, because they've been in Rome longer than the whole Israel-Jewish split. Anyway, I get ahead of myself. So, Ashkenaz Jew, the place of the social role of the Ashkenaz Jew in medieval Western medieval society. Okay, right. But they're also similar, the dwarves, also similar to other marginalized people, be they the Roma, Sinti, Rotvelsh, or Yenish. And so all these other peoples, by the way, and then the Yenish, the Dunedain are also derived from this idea, but, the applications in our more modern history of a similar way. But the dwarves are, so, and all that's to say is the aforementioned different peoples all tend to keep a secret language. You interact with them, but always as an outsider, and you don't really know what goes on in their society. In a similar way, we have that kind of phenomenon with the dwarves. We feel like we know them. We kind of get the sense, but nobody really knows Dwarvish. And therefore, you don't really know the stories. Because a language and a story are inseparable. Remember, for Tolkien, he's a philologist. So we don't know their history, really. We don't know their innermost thoughts. That's always kept secret to us. But the men we know. We are men. We know them. They're given the rings, and we know that these rings hollow them out. They hollow them out so utterly, they become wraiths. Now, the Lord of the Nazgul was a witch king. He's a necromancer, sorcerer, bad, evil dude already. He's already like close to all, as far as I'm concerned, all powerful, right? Compared to what I can do. And he gets the ring, and it hollows him out so utterly, he becomes a wraith. He no longer has a material existence beyond sort of a quasi-gaseous form that is only visible to us because they somehow don a garment, right? Tattered rags or what have you. They don't exist in the normal physical reality anymore. Now, they wear their rings for a short bit of time, and over the course of a human life, normal human life, they get hollowed out to become wraiths. This is one of the things that Gandalf finds remarkable about the One Ring.
Right.
It begins to act on Isildur right away. He gets he goes pretty far down that path within the few short weeks that he has it. Very different from Bilbo, for example, who has it for decades and is attached to it, obviously.
In that first.
Yeah, and he's only really affected by it. He is prolonged. He starts to feel weary after 50, 60, 70 years, but he's not a wraith. He's not out murdering. He doesn't go kill the Sackville Bagginses. He doesn't take over and make himself king of Hobbiton. Anything, no pretensions to power, just trying to escape his neighbors. I think that should tell us something about Sméagol. So for as wretched as Gollum, because Sméagol becomes Gollum, as wretched as Gollum is, one remarkable feature that Gandalf observes and just alludes to as an aside comment is that, when he's talking about, well, there may be hope for Gollum yet. When he's talking to Frodo, when Frodo says, pity Bilbo didn't kill him when he had the chance. Oh, pity and mercy, that stayed his hand, exactly. Is that Gollum isn't, for some reason, the baffled scientists everywhere, Gollum did not become a wraith. He held that thing for over 400 years. And in fact, as I mentioned, he even forgets about it a little bit.
Right. And Gandalf says there in the second chapter, I think it is, of Lord of the Rings, when he's talking to Frodo, the substance of the shadow, name of the chapter, he says that in theory, if the ring were removed from the wearer, like Sméagol or Bilbo, for a certain period of time, they might recover, Gandalf says.
Yes.
They might recover. And this gives great hope to Frodo for his beloved uncle, Bilbo, saying, that would be the case. But what we don't really get immediately is that it could also be true for Sméagol. If the ring moved for a period of time. Yeah.
Also a hobbit, particularly probably of the buck variety, being a river dweller.
Yeah. It's interesting to me that if the power of the ring has to do with nothingness, it's a nihilistic ring, right? It does scoop out and make empty in the same way that Hashem scooped out in the Zimzum the emptiness in order to create This empties out in order to dominate, really, in order to control everything. Same. There's a certain sameness that is hoped for in the creation of this ring. Everybody will be Sauron. Everybody will be nice and neat and pure and clean and have the right gene plasm, and march in lockstep one to the other. There'll be no more personality, no more differentiation, no more Ashkenazi Jews, all these different languages and secret things will all be gone because they'll be wiped away, made clean, and the trains will run on time. That's kind of the idea. I think that the ring is representing, if nothing else.
Because that's a fundamental difference, though, between my self-hollowing out, so kenosis, which is an outpouring. Usually we talk about this in some sort of like outpouring of love, mercy towards another, right? So I'm hollowing out myself to make space for the other. The ring, on the other hand, works the opposite direction. It is something that has an agency that hollows you out against your will. So it's not this the self-hollowing, autokenosis of love, but a thing that drills a hole into you.
Yeah. There's a great movie back in the 80s called The Dark Crystal, and it had some else, but it was a puppet movie, and there's a great scene in there where they suck the essence of the gelflings out, and that's why it stuck with me. Is this really horror? You're like an 11-year-old kid watching this darn thing. You see this puppet character getting the soul ripped out of him by this bloody crystal, and it just stuck with me because it really is like what the ring does. It sucks out the gelfling out of a person, so there is no more desire for happiness and joy and hope for the future or individuality at all. You are now part of the machine. You are now part of the whole mechanism.
Bingo. Which is why Smeagol refers to him, Gollum, as we meet him, always refers to himself in the he's only talking to himself, like Morla the Never Ending Story. Morla the Aged One has no one to talk to but herself. There's parallels in there, but he talks to himself. He refers to himself as precious. In other words, he self-identifies with the ring, the identitylessness of the ring, and he's become he has become coterminous with the hollowness of the ring itself. That's why he refers to himself as my precious and goes around just going Gollum, Gollum, Gollum. But that's not the end of his story, is it?
No, not at all. Not at all, because of course this eucatastrophe occurs. That's Tolkien's word for something terrible that's actually wonderful. This eucatastrophe occurs, and the ring slips off his finger while he's devouring some little orc thing. And Bilbo finds the ring. The least likely of characters, and sort of the cipher in the plans of Sauron. Nobody expected this to happen. He finds the ring and takes it, and that causes so much distress to Gollum because now half of his identity is gone. And so Gollum actually emerges after a period of time from his self-imposed tomb. There's a resurrection.
He emerges from the tomb out of darkness into light?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Even that living under the mountain that Smeagol does, he goes in there because he can't stand the power of the sun.
Exactly.
And he hates it. So he goes underground and goes into the tomb voluntarily, but he's also losing his will at the same time. And that emptiness and darkness down there under the mountain is a parallel to the emptiness and darkness of the Zimzum, and the emptiness and darkness of the void that is talked about at the beginning of the Silmarillion. But there's another interesting element about that scene there in the Hobbit story, is that his little world is rock, it's stone, it's dark, there's water surrounding an island, and then a dome of rock. That's a direct parallel to the Norse image of the world, which was a dome of blue by water and then an island in the middle.
I mean, that's exactly it, but that's the biblical one too, because that's the ancient Near Eastern notion, and broader than the Bible, but ancient Near Eastern understanding of the world is there's the land in the middle surrounded by the ocean of water, and there's this we say, obviously translated as firmament, some archaic English word. Essentially, it's the vaulted ceiling, right? That separates the waters above from the waters below, and it's exactly setting up this primal notion of what the cosmos looks like.
Right.
And so he's this cosmic everyman. He's this fallen Adam
Right.
on his lonely little island.
Yes.
That's a miniature of the world, right? That's what's being depicted for us.
Yeah, it's a fake world. It's a lifeless, artificial world where he
exactly.
is. Because the whole ring, you could look at it another way as not just entering into the void, but the ring really is an interning of
yes.
It's narcissistic, you know.
Yeah.
And so he is narcissistically gazing at the ring the whole time as the new sun in this dark world that he's entered into. It's the only golden thing there, emitting any kind of light. So anyway, the point then is that he emerges from that tomb, from that artificially created death realm, and he goes out into the world of light. And then in the Lord of the Rings, circuitous route, he ends up being the guide for Frodo and for Sam. And the case that really, it occurred to me when I was listening to this great performance by Andy Serkis of the Lord of the Rings. I highly recommend it to anybody if you want an audiobook version. Andy Serkis, I think, does the best I've ever heard. But in his reading of the Substance of the Shadow, it was brought up about how Gollum is a pitiable creature and about how he may play some role in this that we do not yet understand. So I got to think about that. Is it possible that Sméagol is actually saved at the end of the story? I've always thought of him as being sort of an evil character that plays a role in the saving of Middle-earth. But I'm thinking maybe that's not exactly what Tolkien was getting at. Maybe Tolkien was getting at the idea that he too actually is saved if there's salvation in Middle-earth.
I think it's, I think it's much closer to, well, yeah, I think that's closer to that. I mean, if people are willing to, and I know people have a hard time with that, but if they're willing to accept that Anakin Skywalker eventually takes off his helmet and throws the Emperor down the shaft, like, he could get, Gollum could be okay too at the end. And I think, and there's more to this here, because either you have to answer either that Gollum, Sméagol Gollum, is like this convenient tool,
yeah,
and he's Deus ex machina when Frodo couldn't get the job done. That this thing comes in and somehow, I don't know, the puppet strings of Iluvatar grab him and then rip the ring off Frodo and throw him into the fire against Gollum's own will. Or you have the option of going with the world Tolkien actually created, which is everything dances according to the harmony. And the role that Gollum might play yet, that Sméagol might play yet, is not merely to be a useful instrument, but in fact begins this path of repentance himself. Now, are there two wills at work? Absolutely. In fact, that's the beautiful thing about it. Gollum becomes, we see very clearly after some of these interactions with Frodo, there's the two selves. Sméagol starts to revert again. He comes to the surface. Gollum goes away for him. He disappears, seeds.
Yes.
And as they get closer, usually actually provoked by antagonism from Sam Gamgee, Gollum starts to resurface. But there's still this fundamental conflict between Sméagol and Gollum. Two persons. So the ring, because that's what Gollum is, right? It's the ring self, the fake self of Sméagol. It's this other identity. It's almost as though it's a demonic possession of some sort. He had co-identified, given over everything to the Gollum self, to the ring self. But then the Sméagol comes to the surface again. And you have that touching moment where it's all Sméagol for a while now. And that touching moment where he looks out and he has true pity and mercy and love for these two young hobbits who are, for all we know, his direct descendants, if not at least like his great, I think I worked it out to be about 10 generations, nephew of some sort.
Yes. And that's a pivotal scene. It's one of my favorite scenes in the whole story because it's so moving. This, you ever see these photographs of a black hole swallowing a sun, and the sun is like just going down this drain, and that's kind of like Sméagol with the ring. The Sméagol self is like going down the drain of this black hole that the ring represents. And you wonder, is the sun able to escape? Is there any chance for it? And the question of whether or not Gollum is himself working out his salvation in fear and trembling is a very powerful question, I think, that I've never really addressed until just very recently. He doesn't seem to, you can't say that he's actively pulling himself up by his bootstraps morally, you know, and doing all the right things. You know, he's not doing that. He's really this pathetic heroin addict type character. But it harkens me back to two things that I read recently. One was this, I think it was St. Ambrose. It's St. Ambrose in this article. I'll link here at Catholicism.org. And Ambrose says this. This is a really interesting statement. He says, "My fault has become for me the price of redemption, through which Christ came to me. For me, Christ tasted death. Transgression is more profitable than innocence. Innocence had made me arrogant. Transgression made me humble." That's a great line, because it's like, you know, nobody wants to get to the point where they're like Bridie and the Brideshead Revisited, just like sleeping on the doorstep of the chapel, just sweeping up and all. But what if a person is driven to that point, you can't help but be humbled. You can't help but become subordinate to the one God of love. It's like Smeagol has no more pretensions to being a great and noble and virtuous Hobbit warlord. You know, he has no pretension to dominating Middle Earth. There's none of that. For him, he knows, I think very much so, he knows that he is a slimy, lousy malcontent that everybody hates, and he gets kicked around and beaten. He says this all the time, you know, his poor head getting beaten by Sauron and doesn't want to go back into those pits. And, you know, he knows that he's this miserable creature. How could he not?
Like Frankenstein's creature, he knows he's a pathetic wretch.
Yes.
And it may be even like Frankenstein's creature, acting out of that deep, like messed up, perverse shame, committing murders and doing all this stuff.
Yeah.
But when it's Smeagol who really resurfaces, he's fully aware of the Gollum self that's there too. And he struggles with it. He kind of wins for a while, and then he kind of loses. But Smeagol doesn't entirely disappear, even when he resolves to hand them over to Shelob. He's still not fully in, right? Because if he were full Gollum again when he hands them over to Shelob, Gollum would have just jumped in and snatched the ring. Gollum would have been on Frodo's dead body, putatively dead body, before Sam could get there. After Shelob runs off because Sam stabs her, Gollum would have snatched that up right away.
Yeah.
Instead, Gollum hides himself because he did a naughty thing. He did a dirty on his friends. And he's a little ashamed. Now, you're only ashamed if you're a little good.
That's true.
Right?
It's always the psychopath that has no conscience at all that he's done something ill. You know?
Exactly. This isn't Anton Sugar. There's a Smeagol still there. He, as much as he doesn't want Sauron to get the ring, he doesn't really want any harm to come to Master, and not merely because he's petrified with the fear of the solemn oaths that he's sworn on the ring. And even that shows the presence of conscience. Elsewhere, in other books that Tolkien has written, he creates a character with no conscience whatsoever. That would be the dragon Chrysophylax in the Farmer Giles, in Story of Farmer Giles. You have, the dragon swore oaths solemn and, condemning, and if anybody had any conscience, they would have at least, held to their word as best they could in some way, because these terrifying curses that would come down upon you. But alas, the dragon had no conscience at all.
Yep.
We don't see that with Smeagol. Like, Tolkien's capable of writing a character like that. He doesn't write Smeagol that way.
Yeah.
And the end of it, it's just...
Yeah, I know. Hold on. The whole Gollum sound is in his throat, but it is a sound of a machine. That's an interesting point. Gollum, 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 Gollum. Yep. It's like a machine working. And so that side of him is the mechanized mind that has already been bound to the oneness of that one ring. Right. The Smeagol side is the one that's like looking for nuances and new passages and new ways of doing things. I mean, the very name Smeagol means one who inquires, one who delves into things. The explorer is what Smeagol means. So that side is looking for different ways to improve, to discover things, and I think that's the part that's fighting against this mechanized side. And when he gets called out by Sam, and Sam says, "Hey, what are you pawing at him for?" You could say, well, he immediately clicks back to Gollum and becomes just this evil creature, but he doesn't really, as you pointed out, because he gets mad at Sam, and that's an interesting.
He's offended. Exactly right.
Yeah,
he's an offended hobbit.
Yeah, which is something like, what? I'm sneaking. That's what I do. That's all I'm good at. And
right.
that very sarcastic statement that he makes, that all I'm doing is sneaking around, indicates that he is aware that is a possibility, that maybe he's only good for sneaking around. So anyway, he goes and he does this conscious thing going on, and at the very cracks of doom, he's not just, as you pointed out, a deus ex machina. He's really still, I think, working out his own salvation. And I wonder, is he far more intelligent than we give him credit for? Does he come to a realization at the moment that Sam accosts him that maybe for him, the route to salvation is not through love and through mercy and through living a soft life? That option is gone. Living a soft life is not the way he's going to work it out. Is it possible that that there's something in him that says the only way I'm going to work out my salvation is by destroying this ring? That there is no other way for me but to destroy this ring? I don't know.
I think that's a stretch, but still within the realm of possibility. And I think here's a way to make a little bit more sense for anybody who's about to just turn us off and go watch other shorts somewhere. Is that I think this is what you're saying is like not necessarily all reasoned out like that, but more of a felt experience, this intuition that's how his salvation could be worked out. And obviously he's not thinking in these terms. This is millions of billions of years ago. This isn't like post-Christian, whatever. He's not talking like 19th century, 20th century Protestant.
Right.
But that he might intuitively see that, not unlike Frodo, I will take the ring, though I do not know the way. A similar kind of sentiment of, I have sworn to serve the master of the precious, and I'm gonna help. I swore to help Frodo get into Mordor. I don't understand what the hell's gonna happen then. As long as I don't want the bad guy to get it, and and he just doesn't really broach the topic, the idea that Frodo's gonna throw the ring into the fire. At least that's the plan. But he doesn't not know it. In fact, it's indicated. Frodo and Sam kind of chat about this. Frodo's like, yeah, I think he knows that's what we're going to do. He just can't admit it to himself because it would drive him absolutely mad. And nonetheless, and so Sméagol still follows them. He's torn, but he doesn't kill them. He tracks them. He follows them as they get closer and closer to Mount Doom.
Yes.
Even when they're in there, he follows them, and it's not until the very last that he assaults Sam and runs after Frodo. But that's after Frodo assaults Sam too.
Yep.
Frodo just kicked the guy down, knocked him back, said, get the hell away from me, I'm going up there. And then gets mad, decides he's going to keep the ring. I've come to the end of it all, and I decided I will not do what I have come to do. I will claim it for myself, and he becomes the Dark Lord. Frodo becomes the Dark Lord. And what happens in that moment? Sméagol jumps on him.
Yep.
Conflicted, tortured, convoluted, yes. Purely evil? I just don't think so. He doesn't strangle Frodo. He's perfectly capable of doing so.
Yeah, and the order is important too. That it's after Frodo's kicked Sam to the curb, and it's after Frodo has said, I will not do this deed, the ring is mine, and he puts the ring on his finger and vanishes. And then Gollum finds him even though he's vanished, which is interesting. Gollum sees him even though he's vanished. But it's then that Gollum hits. And Gollum, lurking in the background, sees this event going on, and it's then that he attacks. He doesn't attack beforehand. He doesn't attack him while he's still visible. And
he could have.
But sorry,
I think he perfectly could have, but he didn't.
Yeah, he didn't. And that's a very interesting point. It may have been done for dramatic purposes because this is a highly dramatic scene in the novel. But I think maybe Gollum wasn't just waiting for his moment to lunge. I think in some ways the decision to attack Frodo was based upon Frodo suddenly claiming to be the Dark Lord. And I
Yes.
can't help but think that Gollum Smeagol wrestled with that temptation for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
That he want to become the Dark Lord, but at the same time, he was so drawn to. He's like this close to, like asymptotically close to becoming or claiming that he was the Dark Lord. And when he recognized it in another person, is it possible that sparks him to attack? Not just attack because now I'm going to get the ring, because as you point out, he could have done that at any time, but to attack at that moment, because it's not just getting back the ring in some ways. It's, and again, this may not be consciously thought out, it's preserving the one being that he's felt any affection towards for his entire life.
And the only person who's ever showed him the slightest bit of compassion. Well, I mean, the elves, but their touch hurts him. So even though they were trying to be compassionate, he views it as torture.
Yeah.
But it's, the only person he's actually loved.
Yeah. And
he's some amount of compassion towards. Although, to be fair, he did feed Sam. He brought rabbits for Sam. We cannot forget that fact. That's after the whole sneaking out. Well, it's not the sneaking out, sneaking back thing, but it's after Gollum has started to resurface.
Yeah.
He still brings rabbits to Sam. He doesn't kill them in the wilderness. He still kind of accompanies them rather than after Shelob, and he doesn't just murder them outright in Mordor. He accompanies them. He follows them. He still does good. I think you're right. I think it's both halves of him, or rather, both selves dwelling within the body of Smeagol, who's, by the way, still remarkable that he's not a wraith. He's still got a body. And that says something that he's got substantial within him.
Yep. And here's the last bit. Here's the last bit, because I know we're also fighting against the clock here, but this is the last bit where he actually goes into the fire. If I can read this really quick. The fires below awoke in anger. The red light blazed, and all the cavern was filled with a great glare and heat. Suddenly, Sam saw Gollum's long hands draw upwards to his mouth. His white fangs gleamed and then snapped as they bit. Frodo gave a cry, and there he was, fallen upon his knees at the chasm's edge. But Gollum, dancing like a mad thing, held aloft the ring, a finger still thrust within its circle. It shone now as if verily it was wrought of living fire. Precious, 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 Gollum cried. My precious, my precious. And with that, even as his eyes were lifted up to gloat on his prize, he stepped too far, toppled, wavered for a moment on the brink, and then with a shriek he fell. Out of the depths came his last wail, precious, and he was gone. That's such powerful stuff. I mean, I love that moment. But there's no dialogue from Gollum, from Smeagol, up to that point. There's no evil monologuing. I'm going to do this when I get the ring. You know, you're not the Dark Lord. I am. I'm still evil incarnate. I'm going to take this ring. There's none of that crud. No. He attacks Frodo. He bites off his finger, which is also significant, but that's for another day. And then he's at aloft. That's an interesting image that he does that.
So it's him holding up. He's not holding up the ring, like we might see in some film adaptations. He's holding up a finger that's holding the ring.
Yeah.
His kinsman's finger.
And then he dances like a mad thing, which is an echo of the dance of the fool of the world. You know, this mad ecstasy in the fire that William Butler Yeats talks about. Dancing. You know? Like he's dancing with this utter ecstasy. Now I know it's ecstasy over this evilly crafted ring, but it's also a sort of ecstatic dance that he's doing here, because he's recovered the one thing that's giving him joy, and suddenly he's like exalting this thing, and in that midst of that madness, that phrased ecstasy, that's when he falls to the only death I think that he could ever hope to have. There was no other soft living, no going back to the Shire and marrying another Mrs. Gollum. That wasn't going to happen for him. So I think this is the doom, as you said, the Smeagol that was allotted for him from the beginning.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly right. And how perfect is it that not only can the ring only be unmade in the fires in which it was made, but that the only thing that could cure Smeagol, to purify Smeagol of the dross of Gollum, is the fires I mean, it's the fires of Mount Doom. Now, again, Mount Doom. Doom means not terrible ending. Doom means fate.
Yeah.
Doom means destiny. And so it's the mountain of destiny. And this, from the beginning, could be his, because he wasn't like a nice dude. Like, young Smeagol was a real crapper. Like,
Yeah, he was.
he
Yeah,
strangled
was.
his buddy.
Yeah,
Because of the ring, sure. But we also know he was already kind of a miscreant.
Yeah. People didn't like him at all.
And so it could be that, in fact, one could say, if one was looking at this with the case of Smeagol, like a case study of Smeagol, from the very beginning to the very end, with the eyes of, say, the Orthodox Christian, or some branches of rabbinical Judaism, they could look at this and say, from the very beginning, out of God's great mercy, he was given the ring in order to stretch him, and he did all these bad things, yes, of his own volition, but all wove into the great mandala the same pattern, ultimately leading him to go to Mount Doom so he could be cast into the fire, so that the evil that was in him could be purged. Because there's the traditional, like, ancient vision of God is this divine physician that has a medical plan for everybody. And it could be that Smeagol's doom from the beginning, from his early, tween years of being a young miscreant, could be destined then from all time towards the fires of Mount Doom, where he could, the only thing that could cure him.
Yeah.
No, because that's the idea, is that each one of us has some sort of plan towards our curing, our restoration into what our true nature should be.
Yeah.
And we resist that, we go astray from that, we do things, but like a cat that's trying to get out of having a bath, the divine physician keeps trying to plunge us into the water one way or another so that we can be cleansed and healed. And it may be that even all of Smeagol's, all of Gollum's terrible, wretched, wicked doings, murder of innocent babies to eat them, snatching them out of cradles. If you'll read closely, what happens when Gollum comes out of the Misty Mountains, we know that that's what he was doing. All of that are merely attempts to deviate from, but yet also in many ways irrepressible. Like, he's been so warped over so much time that these things are all fumbling steps forwards towards his ultimate doom, towards his destiny, towards his fate. And it's not one that's for his woe, but ultimately for his good and the salvation of the whole world.
Yeah, which is a great sort of like crescendo to this whole discussion. I think the only thing left is the date, because Tolkien was very intent on his dates, and it makes much more sense about why it's at this date. This date is, people say, well, it's just happenstance. No, it's very consciously chosen. On the one hand is the Old Norse New Year. And this was the beginning of the New Year in Norse mythology. And so consequently, it was the day after Ragnarok. Because Ragnarok happens and then you have rebirth.
Interesting.
It's also the day that is the vernal, it's the first full moon after the vernal equinox, because of course their religion is sort of fashioned around that whole solar lunar cycle, as most all religions were. And the vernal equinox, 9 months ahead of that, or beyond that, goes to the solstice, the winter solstice. So we're looking at the beginning of the new year after Ragnarok, but also the first full moon after the vernal equinox, which was shifted when Gregory changed the calendar from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar, which we're now in. And the Gregorian calendar begins on January 1st, but the old calendar used to begin on the first full moon after the vernal equinox, which leads right into April, which is why we have April Fools, by the way, because people still stuck to the earlier Julian calendar, and then this massive propaganda technique. They were called fools or idiots because they still believed in this older calendar and they weren't up to date with the Gregorian calendar. But anyway, the Norse said that that's the beginning of creation again after Ragnarok. So it's a perfect date for it. But it's also where the church put the Feast of the Annunciation, which
Right.
I think is far more actually pertinent than the Norse calendar, although both are important. Because what does the church tell us over and over again? You have to die to yourself to be reborn in Christ. Die to yourself, be born in Christ. Well, if you do die, that would be a Ragnarok, I would assume.
Bingo.
And being reborn is not just a sort of good feeling you have and putting your hands in the air and shaking your booty for Jesus.
Solve a lie.
It's not that. You could say it's literally being reborn,
Literally
by
being born, remade, a new Genesis.
Yeah. Yeah,
and it's only in fire that could happen. I mean, whether that's the Ragnarok of the Norse or the ancient pre-Persian Iranian civilization of Mesopotamia, the ancient, I don't know what it was, one of these, I mean, going way, way, way back to the first peoples of Mesopotamia, this is also the new year. This is the new day. In fact, people across what is now Turkey, Iran, and Iraq will celebrate Novruz today. Or, it's the new day, Novruz being new day. And it's, again, similar to the new creation after Ragnarok. So this is this almost universal thing, or at least common across very different cultures and very different millennia.
Yeah. And being reborn by the Virgin Mary, the Annunciation, they sing the Magnificat today and all. That image of being reborn in the Christ means that you are reborn not just to a life of holiness, but you're reborn to someone else, to someone, you mentioned earlier, you willingly hollow yourself out so that someone else can be there. And
exactly,
I guess you could look at that in a metaphorical way, as in you do this for the children, Gollum
right.
so that Frodo and Sam can live. And Frodo and Sam live so that Sam can go back and rejoin his beloved Goldberry, is it? Right? And no, it's anyway, his wife.
Yep.
But his daughter, Eleanor.
Right, Eleanor's daughter. Yeah.
Part of the future of
Rose.
of fire, right? Eleanor Rose.
Rosie's his wife. Yeah.
Rose's wife, yeah, right. So Eleanor becomes a sort of future of the Shire.
Exactly
Sam
right.
did all this for her, and Frodo did all this for Sam, and Smeagol did all this for Frodo, I guess you could say. It's just really interesting. It's why I consider it sort of almost a perfect novel, because it does end with that beautiful scene of Sam coming back to his house and setting Eleanor on his knee and say, "Well, Rosie, I'm home.
I'm back."
Right?
Yeah.
I'm back. Yeah. And that's why there's no sequel necessary, Tolkien. Thank you, but we don't need to see the dagger laugh. That's fine. You just stay at home.
Yeah.
Want to write fan fiction? Write about how Eleanor becomes the savior of the Shire or something like that. Because
Right.
at least we're in that girl power mode right now.
Yeah.
Might as well do that. No, I think this is really great. And still, there's always more to be said about this, but this has been really very fruitful, I think. And I really do appreciate very much being able to talk about it on this fantastic day, which, by the way, doesn't seem to have a name aside from the destruction of the ring. So I'm thinking maybe we should say the Unmaking, perhaps.
The Unmaking, the new day. I like the ancient Near Eastern approach. New day.
What was it you said? What was the word?
Novruz.
Nafruz. All right, we'll do that. Nafruz. This is the Nafruz. I like that very much. Well, happy Nafruz to you, sir, and farewell wherever you fare. To Ares receive you at journey's end.
And may the wind under your wings bear you to where the sun sails and the moon walks.
I'm gonna stop recording here now, but because these things like they pop up and they last for a while and they get taken down by the powers that be. So this has illustrations of Ted Naismith. So it's a nice.
Ooh, that's not.
Yeah. I will put it at the document for you to have.
All right.
There she blows.
Yeah, if you're into that kind of thing.
Can't have these things floating around for people to actually read. So, let's see, blah, 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 blah. And by the way, you can see I'm wearing my blue and gold today for the event. I know there's not supposed to be a direct connection, but I sometimes wonder with those 3 rings for the Elven Kings, is that like England and France and Italy versus the one ring is Germany? I don't know.
Probably England, Ireland, and Scotland from Tolkien's point of view.
Ireland, Scotland, that's what it is.
Triple Kingdom.
For sure. Whatever.
Yeah.
Just for the record, I'm behind by like 2 or 3 episodes, so I'm going to really confuse that. Pardon me if your daughter's there, but I was confused the shit out of everybody and like post this one first.
Yes. It's better that way. It's like Tolkien, He'll tell you what happened, and then we're going to get 2 million years of backstory.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It's funny with him. He says that this was his greatest work, and it's the only thing I defer with him on, aside from his poetry. This is not his greatest work. I still think this is the greatest thing he's ever written. This is just still, for me, one of the best novels I've ever read. Some are really great, and certainly De Gustibus Non Disputandum.
Right.
But I think that whole thing that he does in Lord of the Rings is fantastic.
It's just absolutely brilliant. And it occurred to me too, one thing I'm struck now with this image that Gollum, Sméagol is man, like Sméagol as man, as Adam. And it's the old Adam has to be cast into the fire in order for the new creation to be about.
It just occurred to me that you said that Sméagol means one who delves into things or inquires, but it could also be translated as the digger.
Yes.
Like the farmer, like the gardener. Adam.
Yeah, the farmer, the gardener, the digger. Yes. Right.
That's interesting.
Well, that's very cool.
Yeah. Well,
because that's what all of humanity is. We've just been slouching towards this, murdering and pillaging our own way.
Well, and that's the thing too, that was occurring to me during our discussion, is that our tendency, I think, is to think, I have to fix everything. I have to dominate. I have to make everything perfect. Hey, you don't go out and plant a goddamn tomato plant, Stop trying to be the ruler of all Italy or the ruler of all Germany or whatever it is,
Right.
So go ahead and you can kick it off. I'll be silent for a couple seconds here and you go ahead.
All right.